is Adrian Chavez. He also serves on the board and will be your moderators for this afternoon session. For the next hour or so, we'll have the opportunity to hear one-on-one from our finalists. Each finalist will have about 25 minutes to answer the exact same questions. And Dr. Ahart, before we begin, we'd like you to say a couple of words if you have anything to say before we start the questioning.
Oh, okay, I missed it. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank the board and the community for having me as a guest today and giving me consideration for the superintendency. And I want to congratulate you all on obviously a very engaged community. The number of people who have participated in the first 3 sessions, as well as what I understand to be hundreds viewing online, speaks to the investment that the community has in the success of the district. And that's super encouraging to somebody who's considering taking on the leadership role for the organization. Thanks again for having me.
And just so you know, APS did solicit questions from throughout the community and received about 1,200 different questions. So from those 1,200 questions, they were whittled down with the help of a committee and a consultant to come up with the 12 questions that we'll ask of the finalists here. There are people watching online, so we'd like to thank them for their time and their participation viewing on the APS YouTube channel. Our first question, Dr. Ahart, what is your experience with community schools, and how do you envision supporting community schools in APS should you become superintendent?
Community schools was a huge part of how we did business in Des Moines. I'm a big believer in the Community and Schools program. One of the most powerful aspects of it, I think, is giving a meaningful framework for folks who aren't intimate with how school districts work to understand how important it is that schools are ensuring that some basic needs that our students have need to be met prior to them being able to be successful academically. And so just being upfront, recognizing that, and then having efficient structures by which we can meet those needs across the district is invaluable. So community and schools is just part and parcel of how I do business because, as I've said a number of times, we can't do it alone. And so taking seriously the challenge of filling in some of those gaps for our students such that they can be successful academically is something we just need to own and then build the appropriate structures to ensure that we can get those gaps filled effectively, and it's not a piecemeal approach.
Okay. Question number 2. What will you do to ensure that every student has equal access to high-quality, grade-level instruction?
I don't know exactly how I would approach it in APS. I would want to take some time to get to know exactly what's in place right now. I could tell you that I recognize that to be a huge problem when I became superintendent in my last district. And one of the first things that I chose to do from a school improvement perspective was to engage in standards referenced grading. Standards referenced grading gave us the opportunity to be really high and tight on exactly what our expectations were for each standard at each grade level, and then gave us a reliable, a valid and reliable measuring stick with which to compare what was happening in School A with what was happening in School B and what was happening in School C, to ensure that the quality and rigor of instruction that you were receiving was not determined by your zip code or which school you attended. But standards reference grading isn't the only way, but certainly what needs to happen is that we have teams of teachers across the district comparing notes, evaluating student work together, and getting consistency in what the guaranteed and viable curriculum is in APS at every grade level, because inequity at the elementary level just expands as students matriculate. So it's really important to be high and tight on that at the beginning.
Question number 3. How will you balance the demands of the teachers union with the strategic plan of the APS board?
Well, APS has a well fleshed out, that's something I want to congratulate you all on, is having gone through the arduous work of creating a strategic plan, and I think it's a good one. In terms of balancing the demands of the teachers union with the strategic plan of the APS board, I think it's really important that in my work as superintendent that I'm engaging closely and building a very strong relationship with the leadership of the teachers union, and I've done that very successfully in the past. Don't always agree, don't always see face to face or see eye to eye on certain particulars, but the teachers are vital to having the success of the strategic plan over the next 5 years, and so it's really important that they have a seat at the table, and that there's genuine concern in hearing what the challenges are that the teachers are experiencing and doing everything within our means of eradicating those whatever gaps may be surfaced.
Question number 4. How can you, as superintendent, help make the schools in our community safer, especially in regards to gun violence?
This is a challenge. I remember having moved to a new school when I was teaching, when I had just left the state of Colorado. I was in Iowa teaching when we got word of the school shooting in the Denver area way back in the late 1990s, and that struck me in the gut, because I had been at that high school. I was a speech and debate coach in Colorado, and I'd been to meets hosted at that school, and it just seemed unfathomable that could happen in a school. Flash forward to, I think it was 2018, where there were, I think, 26 or either 26 or 28 school shootings. It's an insane reality that we're living in. I'll say this though, our students want to feel safe, absolutely, and they want to feel at home in our schools. And unfortunately, much of what actions that we take as adults don't always make them feel safe. So I'm not sure that metal detectors are part of the solution. Perhaps they are. But what I think is most important is that we have an avenue, an anonymous avenue for both teachers and staff to report possible issues with gun violence, and that we have a way to rapidly respond to those. We were fortunate over my time in Des Moines, where most of what we learned and were able to prevent was because there was an anonymous way for folks to report, and we were able to get on top of that. But it's hugely important, I know, to the entire community.
Question number 5. How will you effectively address language access and learning conditions in compliance with the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit?
I think this is a rather a complex issue, but I think that first and foremost, we need to connect with the families whose students are specified in the Yazzie Martinez case, and make sure that we're very clear on exactly what they need and what barriers they've experienced in receiving what it is that they need. I don't know enough about the specific situation right now, school by school in APS, but I would imagine that part of that solution is going to have to be recruiting within certain language communities and developing some support so that we are able to staff up and provide the services required by Yasi Martinez. And certainly we need to make sure that we've clearly identified what the challenges are at present and have a comprehensive plan in place, including how we're spending those dollars to address those needs.
Question number 6. The issue of changes in school schedules and start times has gotten a lot of attention locally lately. What do you think the optimal school schedule looks like, and how do you go about determining that?
Okay, that's a great question. I will tell you this, as a middle school principal, I actually changed our master schedule halfway through my first year there. And that seems insane. But it was absolutely the right thing to do because our staff had very inequitable planning time. Our students didn't have nearly enough, depending on grade level, didn't have nearly enough time in reading or math instruction and access to the related arts or specials or electives, whatever the term du jour is, was inequitable by grade level. And so I did a change in the master schedule, and it actually worked real well, and we refined it over time. But I can tell you that after examining especially high school schedules and doing a change in high school schedules district-wide, you can't define the perfect schedule unless you define exactly what you want from your schedule. But I want to highlight this. That's really important, and there's a give and take with every element of a schedule. What I do emphasize very, very strongly, though, is schedules and calendars. Schedules and calendars drive how our staff spends their time. And so I've gotten very creative in the past over changing our master calendar such that we had appropriate professional development time for teachers at the right time, and that we could more tightly define learning cycles and evaluate those school by school. So I tell you that there's not an ideal schedule, but you can build as close as you can come to an ideal schedule when you first define what it is exactly that you want from that schedule.
Question number 7. How will you, as the new superintendent, address the serious teacher shortage in APS and retain current educators?
Again, that's a huge problem nationally, not unique to APS, but certainly is of concern locally for this audience. I've done a few things in the past that I would hope to be able to recreate. One thing is all employees of the district, especially teachers, need to be treated as professionals. They work in education, and sometimes I think our communities feel like, well, since you work in a school, that's different somehow than working in a law office or working in a medical office or working in the insurance industry. We need to make sure that our staff are respected and as much as possible engender that kind of respect throughout the community. And we need to look at what the experience is as an employee in APS and strategically take steps to improve what that experience looks like. I did that as a superintendent and was able to get our district into the Forbes best mid-sized employers list. And that wasn't one thing that we did, it was multiple things, but the biggest thing is recognizing that our staff, our professionals who are doing extremely important work and need to feel respected both when they're at work and when they're away from work. The other thing that I think is really important is ensuring that we make teaching at APS as attractive as possible. So I just spoke about that, making this a destination employee for young educators, and then figuring out ways in which we can increase the stickiness of the district to those new to the profession. I did what I thought was a highly successful alternative teacher contract when I was in Des Moines. It didn't cost us, it wasn't funded by a grant, it was just something that we did organically. And we were able to increase, and I'm really proud of this number, we were able to increase the 5-year retention rate of new teachers to 95%. And then after that, they were able to earn a master's degree at our expense if they stayed for 8 years. We had huge success with that, and the teachers in that program, they stayed with the district. They were supported in ways that made them successful working with our students, because they don't always have that coming out of their teacher prep programs. And they also ended up becoming largely our next group of school leaders, coaches, VPs, et cetera.
Question number 8. What measures would you take to ensure cultural sensitivity and awareness among students and staff? And how do you plan to uphold equity and anti-racism across the school district?
First, I think one of the things that needs to happen is that student voice needs to be a part of any of these efforts. In my second year as a superintendent, I created a superintendent's student advisory, and we recruited students from each of our high schools, including our alternative high school, and we made sure, with the help of our school counselors, that group of students, about 25 of them, was comprised not just of the straight A students who always excelled in school, but we had some of that kind of demographic, but we had made sure we had every race, multiple languages, multiple identities, and different levels of student engagement included in that group. And that group provided me tremendous information and help in creating strategies to overcome challenges that were impacting our students, including anti-racism. We figured out, we didn't figure it out, but we had lots of valuable insights from our students about how they were experiencing what they perceived to be anti-racism, and it informed how we provided development for our teachers. And in fact, sometimes, in some cases, we had our students providing the professional development for our teachers. Anti-racism and equity. And equity just has to be front and center of all school improvement. It has to be the first step in how we create plans. It has to be the first step in how we execute plans. It has to be really the driving force behind all we do, or we're never going to get the results with the whole span of students that we're attempting to serve. 2 minutes is not very long, by the way.
Question number 9. It seems that many of our schools are very small or very old, in some cases both. Would it be wise to close schools and merge campuses to utilize staff and resources more effectively?
On the face of it, the answer would be yes, but it can't be as simple as that. So every school has its own unique history and plays its own unique role in a community. So I would need more understanding about, a particular school and its particular history and what its current enrollment is. The easy thing is to say, let's close all the elementaries and then set them up so that they're, from a financial perspective, the most efficient. So it gives us more dollars to spend elsewhere, but that obviously isn't something that you can do. I would make sure that we've strategically identified attendance boundaries so that we're utilizing space as effectively as possible. And certainly another factor needs to be what needs to be invested in a building to get it to the level that it is an attractive place to work and an attractive place for the student to attend. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. So I'll give you that cop-out answer to that question.
Okay. Question number 10. How do you plan on being collaborative with the community in a manner that is authentic and not token?
Okay, I'm going to tell you something that so several years ago, our board engaged in student outcomes focused governance and identified SMART goals for the very first time for our district. And among those goals were not dissimilar from what your community has identified for APS, were the identification of some populations that traditionally have been underserved. And it's been something that the district had been, pursuing, for decades and hadn't gotten there. So what I decided to do was to create a team for each of our SMART goals, and that team was comprised of a group of educators from our curriculum and instruction department, but the rest of the team of 50 or 60 people were people from the community. And the very first task was to identify root cause of why it is we weren't being successful. And so we had a group of, and we had I can't say this happened automatically. I mean, it took a series of meetings for them to understand that we were being serious about this and not tokenizing anyone. And this was going to be a long-standing process. And for them to help us recruit everyone that we needed at the table to participate. But as a result, I think we had a group of over 100 community members engaged in this community problem-solving process, who continued to pay attention to the progress that we were making or failing to make on the goals, and had a vested interest in seeing us be successful. And they were certainly helpful in identifying, helping us see, through all of our specialty education and becoming educators, what the real issues were and how we could effectively connect with those students and provide the right solutions, not just what we thought were the right solutions.
Question number 11. How do you plan to create an inclusive environment that not only acknowledges the unique needs of newcomer students, but actively supports the needs of newcomer students?
Now, I haven't explored exactly how APS addresses this challenge right now, but in Des Moines, we were the one place in the state where refugees landed and where immigrants of other descriptions landed. And so they virtually all attended DMPS, at least for the first several years of their residency in the United States. It became very cumbersome to be going back and forth with the resettlement agencies and district staff. So after a year or two of just being really frustrated with how time-consuming that was becoming and how poorly we felt like we were serving those families, those newcomer families, we created a Center for New Americans. And essentially what we did was create offices for staff at these agencies, and with some of our staff actually create a program not just for the students, more importantly, really for the adults, so that we were actively helping resettle these individuals into the community, helping them learn a modicum of English, enough for them to get their way around town, understand how to pursue permanent housing, how to help get them employed, and selfishly to help them understand how our school system works, so that they could be better supports for us as we attempted to serve their students. So that was just an ongoing center that expanded over time as we found better and more ways to help our newcomer community become anchored in the greater Des Moines metro.
Last question. Why do you think you are a good fit for this job?
This is an easy question to answer, but a difficult one to say out loud, because I'm not used to speaking this way about myself. I'm a damn good educator, and I think the innovation that I've engaged in almost every role that I've had as a public educator helps to demonstrate that I do look at public education from a little bit of a different angle than a lot of traditional school administrators. I care very deeply for kids, and something that I remember taking a reference call. There was a teacher that had left my building while I was a principal, who had moved out of state, and it was right at the beginning of the school year, just about to start, and the principal was talking to me and trying to do a reference check on this teacher, and he was very frustrated because I wasn't giving him any kind of a meaningful response to anything, and he finally said, I finally said, you know, when I do reference checks on teachers, one of the things I like to ask is, if you had the opportunity, would you hire this person again? And he said, oh, if you had the opportunity, would you hire? And I said, no way would I ever hire this person again. And he says, oh, I get it. The way I look at it is, if I'm the superintendent in APS, all of the kids are our kids, but we're going to be getting kids from all over the place. You know, you all experience that. They're all our kids. And if we believe in the promise of public education, that our city and our state of New Mexico and our country is well enough off right now that we don't need to be engendering an educated, engaged citizenry, then we're kind of missing the boat. We need our kids engaged, and we need them to be, we need for them to have agency. We have too many challenges in our community and in our country for us not to be getting the best out of the next generation. And I have a record of helping make that happen.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. Before we end, you have 1 minute with any final thoughts. 1 minute, please.
The challenges are many with public education. Funding, calls for censorship about what materials we use to teach kids, technology, you know, all of this stuff, social media, all of these things are huge challenges for sure. They didn't look like, those challenges didn't, they were different when I was in school, but I'm sure that the educators that served me felt that they were just as urgent and just as important. So I think at the speed of change that we experience as a world today, and how quickly and rapidly we can communicate, and how rapidly misinformation and disinformation can infect, you know, our society, schools are more important now than ever. And I'm a firm believer in the power of public education, and feel like that's been really my life's mission, and I want to continue to do that work.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. That concludes this session with Dr. Ahart. Dr. Ahart, we will see you again this evening for the evening sessions with employees and then the general public. At this time, we'd like to... Yes. We will take a quick break while we bring in the second candidate, Dr. Blakey. hard to help.
Walkout song or something. It's okay.
Okay, welcome, Dr. Blakely. Welcome back. You're going to have about 25 minutes to answer questions that we also asked of Dr. Ahart. But before we begin, would you like to take a couple of minutes to address the crowd?
Thank you all for being here, and those of you that have been with us from this morning. Thank you for your commitment to our kids and giving the time this morning to learn more about us so that you really have a say in who you feel can lead our district. And so I just want to thank you for all of the time that you're putting in today.
All right, great, thank you. Let's get right into your first question. What is your experience with community schools, and how do you envision supporting community schools in APS should you become superintendent?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I am a staunch supporter of community schools. In my role prior to now, I was the Associate Superintendent for Learning Zone 1, which is basically the southeast area of Albuquerque, which includes Highland High School, Manzano High School, Albuquerque High, and all of the feeder schools. And during that time, we significantly increased the number of community schools that we had in our schools because we knew that the community school framework was key in being able to achieve results with our students. And also knew that investing in seeing our community as an asset was really important in being able to propel the work of our schools forward. A few years ago, we worked on refiguring 3 elementary schools, Whittier Elementary, Los Padillas Elementary, and Hawthorne Elementary School. And those 3 schools were identified by the state as the lowest performing schools in the district. And during that time, we used the community school framework as the central framework to be able to build the work of the school to transform the schools. So I see that as kind of the foundation of the work, and my support of community schools and Albuquerque Public Schools is strong because I know that our community is an asset, and I know that the community school framework and the work of our community schools is what helps us propel our student outcomes forward.
Thank you. Question number 2, what will you do to ensure that every student has equal access to high quality grade level instruction?
I think that this is kind of the core of the work that we have to do in instruction. And again, going back to when I was Associate Superintendent of Learning Zone 1, one of the things that we did that showed a lot of success and promise for our students, in fact, at the time our schools were growing in student proficiency at a higher rate than the other learning zones, but it was because of our commitment to looking at student tasks. So during that time, what we did was we established instructional rounds as a way of looking at instruction in the schools. And instructional rounds essentially meant that the principals were going into classrooms at various schools around the district, and particularly in that learning zone, and they were examining the task that students were being asked to do in the classroom. And it was during that time that we would go, for example, to one elementary school into 3rd grade to evaluate what the task was that the students were being asked to do in the school and align it to the standard that the students were supposed to be being taught. And very quickly, the principals identified the disconnect that at some schools they were being taught 3rd grade standards in a 2nd grade class, and at other schools it could be that they were being taught 2nd grade standards in a 3rd grade class because of the looking intentionally at the task of what the students were being asked to do. So I think that using that as a framework and really working with our principals and our teachers to establish the learning tasks that are being asked in the classroom and making sure all of our students have access to grade level standards is essential in us making sure that we have equal outcomes for our students.
And question number 3, how will you balance the demands of the teachers union with the strategic plan of the APS board?
I find this to be a really interesting question because the balance assumes that there's a imbalance, right? So I think the work really involves that we all come to the table in looking at the same outcome that we want for our students. I kind of go back to those of you that were here with my introduction in looking at who is a child to us that's important to us and what are our expectations for that child. So even at the negotiations table, having that child, whether for me it's one child, for you it's another child, but as we make decisions and we negotiate with each other, that we remember what the outcome is of what we're trying to do. I don't think it should be set up in a way where there's like a have and have not or a winner and a loser, because we're all in the work together and we need each other to be able to move the work forward. So I think the partnership is really essential, but I also think listening is important because we all come with different perspectives to the negotiations, and being able to work through those and push on each other, I think is healthy. I think that healthy push is what propels us forward. And I think when we don't utilize that and we aren't willing to kind of question each other, I think that it stalls our progress. So I think that it's good if it's healthy, and in the end, our outcome is still the same, that we want the best for our children. And that's the purpose of the goals and the strategic plan. So I don't think it's necessarily like a balance or a winner or loser situation. I think it's us using our expertise at all different levels of the table to make sure that we're pushing on each other, and in the end, we're making decisions in the best interest of our students.
And question number 4, how can you as superintendent help make the schools in our community safer, especially in regards to gun violence?
Thank you. I can say that it goes way slower when there's somebody else sitting here, but the 2 minutes is going really fast. So I think that there's a multifaceted approach to this. And the first thing is acknowledging that we have a gun violence issue in our community, I think is essential. So that being said, I do feel like it's important. Our board, for example, passed a policy about parents locking up guns. I think that it takes a little bit of everything to be able to acknowledge and to keep our kids safe to what the problem is. In talking to some students who have brought weapons to school, when they talk about it, a lot of times they talk about that they don't feel safe, and that's why they brought the gun to school. And although as adults we know that that is not an acceptable reason to bring a gun to school, we have to get to the root cause of what is causing students to not feel safe, and what are they learning that is making it that guns is the acceptable answer to address if you don't feel safe. So we have to get to the root of the problem with them as far as addressing mental health needs for our students, bullying concerns for our students, increasing our see something, say something protocols, and continuing collaborating with outside partners. We've just started collaborating with the DA's office, and they've gone into our schools to help talk to our students about what happens if you bring a gun to school, because our kids, you have to remember, if they're scared, but they also, their frontal lobe isn't developed and they're negotiating and figuring out decision making. And so they have to see what the results are of their immediate decisions. And so it's kind of a multifaceted approach, from mental health supports to bringing in the DA's office to the violence intervention programs, and working all together as a community to address gun violence.
Question number 5, how will you effectively address language access and learning conditions in compliance with the Yazzie-Martinez lawsuit?
So every time I see the Yazzie and Martinez lawsuit questions, it's kind of like is a little bit of a punch to the gut, that that's what it took for us to acknowledge what we were failing in our students. And so I appreciate the question, and it's also kind of like a call to action that it took parents and the community going to a lawsuit to show that we weren't providing an adequate education. So the first thing is to acknowledge what we have not done and to make a commitment on moving forward. And some of that means that we're questioning all of our decisions. Is this addressing the students that we're in most need to serve? I think that the goals that the board has outlined is a great way to start that, because it's bringing to the table that if we lift up our students and we look at how they really are doing, then you can't hide behind anything else as far as not addressing the data that we see. My experience in just understanding the language barriers that students bring is I come from a background as an English language teacher. And so I know that our students have to be seen as assets and not deficits. And it is one thing that I worry about with the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit, is that we have to, as adults, see the assets that kids are bringing and not see it as that it's a barrier to their learning, but instead use it as leverage to enrich the lives of ourselves and of our children, to be able to address the needs, to adapt our practices, and to serve our children to achieve the best outcomes.
Question number 6. The issue of changes in school schedules and start times has gotten a lot of attention lately. What do you think the optimal school schedule looks like, and how do you go about determining that?
So out of the, 2,000 questions that were submitted, I kind of knew that this would probably be a question. But I didn't think of the answer yet, just kidding. So I think part of it is that ideally, so if it says, what do you think the optimal school schedule would look like if everybody started and ended at the same time, and it was exactly at the same time of every person's work schedule, every parent's work schedule, which also varies, then ideally we would, be able to figure everything out. But that's not the case. And so part of what's happened is that we have extended the school day. So the hours, as many of you, I'm assuming in this audience know, of elementary school used to be shorter, now it's longer. So the time that there used to be flexibility for kids to get to school was a little bit more flexible, because not everybody was at school for the exact same amount of hours. But now that they're at the same amount of hours, I kind of go back to my little friend here that was a mathematician and how he could figure it out for us. Because we have to figure out how to stagger bells across the city so that we don't, one, we have to figure out for our own transportation system, but two, we also have to help with the city transportation, because you notice when school starts that there's more traffic. So how do we balance all of those and make sure that we are meeting the needs of kids? We were looking at redoing the calendar for this year, and I was adamant we can't do everything, but which of these decisions will best be connected to meeting student outcomes? Because we can't do everything, but we can prioritize by connecting our decisions to student outcomes. So when we look at the start and end times, or we look at the calendar, how are we making decisions based on student outcomes and not what feels comfortable or vacation times or whatever the case may be? I need 3 more minutes. I'll skip the next question. So,
Question 7. How will you, as the new superintendent, address the serious teacher shortage in APS and retain current educators?
It's really interesting because actually my dissertation work was about teacher culture and why teachers thrive or don't thrive in a school. And it's all based around culture. And although pay obviously incentivizes people, the reason that people leave a workplace, particularly a school or profession, is more based on the culture that is set up. And I think that as leaders, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're setting up the school culture for teachers to be able to thrive in those environments. Because it's not, people always think if you incentivize here or incentivize there, but really all of the research shows that it's based on Who's the teacher working with? What's the collaboration structures in the school? How are the teachers being supported? That's how the teachers are going to thrive in the environment. And that's how our kids are going to want to be teachers. Because if they're watching, we all get socialized into the teaching profession at a very young age. And so we kind of make our minds up then. And how do we make it so that our students, like this one that was sitting here from West Mesa who wants to be a teacher, how do we encourage that? How do we build upon it and not use it as, well, are you sure you want to be a teacher? But it's like, of course she wants to be a teacher. Let's invest, let's rally around her. Because I said earlier, I can't remember what group it was, if it was you all or the other group, but I learned really early in my career as a principal that my work is dedicated to students. That's why I'm in this field of education, but I can't jump over the adults to get to the students. We have to invest in the adults to get to the students. And so that means investing into our staff to rally around kids and creating the environments in which they will succeed.
Question number 8. What measures would you take to ensure cultural sensitivity and awareness among students and staff? And how do you plan to uphold equity and anti-racism across the school district?
So the question is really interesting because I'm just sitting here thinking of myself. As a woman of color, I wouldn't be in the position to even have this opportunity to speak to all of you if people didn't believe in me or encourage me to push forward. Because it's not easy and there are certainly barriers. But how do we continue to break down those barriers for our students, to create environments for them to succeed so that there are students like myself that can be up here not just as a, oh look, somebody made it to be on this stage, but it's because I'm seen as an asset instead of it being like a deficit. And so I think that a lot of the work that we do in cultural sensitivity and awareness is creating places of belonging for our students and our families, because it's within those environments and feeling of belonging that people will thrive. And I think that it's on the adults to be able to make those spaces for our families and our children, because it's our responsibility to make it happen. If I wouldn't be in this business of education, if I didn't believe in breaking down barriers for our kids to be successful and knowing that in order to have equal outcomes for our students, we have to have equitable inputs. And I know that that's my responsibility. It's my responsibility in every role that I've had. And so I just want to create an environment where kids see me as a role model, they see each other as role models. They create these, like this student from El Dorado, they create places for them to be successful and for them to lead. And I think that that's our responsibility, is to turn our community into a place of seeing everybody as assets instead of overcoming barriers.
Question number 9. It seems that many of our schools are very small or very old, or both. Would it be wise to close schools and merge campuses to utilize staff and resources more effectively?
This is a good question, which is also one that I kind of assumed would be here. But I do think that we need to, but we have to do it very intentionally and methodically. So last year we did close La Luz Elementary School, and this year we are closing Duranis Elementary School. And a couple of years ago, we closed Acoma Elementary School. And it is a little bit of a slow process. And people have different thoughts of how fast or slow it should be. But we're in the business of people. And so it's really easy if it was like a business that we just, it's too small, it's not performing with it's not getting enough return on investment, we board it up. But we all know in our community, I know in my neighborhood, that every time a store even closes and it's boarded up, it's like a hit to our community. And now it's like an eyesore, and then there's crime, and it's not something that we want to invest in our community. So it's really important that as we close our schools, that we're investing it in, we know what we're doing, we're repurposing the building with another property. So whether that be partnering with charter schools for them to utilize her facilities, I spoke about earlier using our facilities to open up the literacy center for the state. I think we're willing to do it. We just need to make sure that we're very thoughtful and methodical and making sure we're not just boarding up buildings, because if you look at the demographics of where schools are small, they're often like in places where you don't want to just board up a building and have something empty sitting there. You also want to make sure that kids have access to a neighborhood school when you do consolidate a school. So there's all these factors that go into it, and I think we need to be bold and continue moving forward on the work and continuing partnering with people like the charter schools and the state PED and whoever can utilize our properties so that we're moving forward in a very thoughtful way and investing in the communities while we are repurposing this school.
Question number 10. How do you plan on being collaborative with the community in a manner that is authentic and not token?
I think that my track record speaks for that, just in my ability to be collaborative and work with other people. I'm a middle child. I didn't put that in my slide. Maybe for the nighttime I'll put that in. But I only say that because as a middle child, those of you that are middle children or have a middle child, you kind of grow up adapting to how to collaborate with other people. That's kind of your role. You navigate like the older and the younger, and you're the next child, but you're not the next child, you know. And so I've grown up just like being kind of the collaborative person that brings everybody together. And in doing that, I'm really good at listening to people and knowing that we're only stronger when we're together. So I think that that's really important, just to know about my own personal story, because that's why it's authentic. It's in a manner that's how I work, is collaboratively. I listen and then respond. And I have that commitment to people. And when I've worked in all areas of my career, whether it's with the students as a teacher, or principals when I was supervising principals, or teachers when I was a principal, I feel like I listen really well to and that's where the ideas come from. Like even the ideas that I've expressed in my plan this morning or in my answers right now, they're not like original Gabriella Blakey ideas. I mean, they might have a little twist on them, but they're all ideas I get from listening to people and talking to all of you and putting those together in a tangible plan that we can propel and move forward. So I think that my ability to collaborate is always authentic, and that's one of the strengths I think I bring to this position.
Question 11. How do you plan to create an inclusive environment that not only acknowledges the unique needs of newcomer students, but actively support the needs of newcomer students?
This question is really important to me because it's why I went into education when I first started teaching. So as I said earlier, I started teaching as English as a second language teacher. And like many people, the student from West Mesa, close your ears right now, because like many of us, when we graduate from school in New Mexico and then we go away and go teach in Seattle, and then I came back, so don't take that road, just stay here. I went and taught in Seattle, and I actually worked at a high school starting a newcomer program in north of Seattle. And it was during that work that I noticed what we were failing as a system to be able to meet the needs of our students that were newcomers. At the time, I grew up in New Mexico, and I had one student that spoke Spanish in my class, and most of my students were from the Middle East and from the Ukraine at the time. And I worked really hard to establish a newcomer pathway for the students and to change their pathway in high school, because they would come when they were like 15 or 16 years old and be behind on credits because they didn't have any credits, and start to learn a language. And so myself and a teacher I worked with reestablished the whole curriculum and the whole graduation pathway and created a whole newcomer school at that high school that still exists today. In that work, it's always been kind of my passion. And when I was an associate superintendent in Learning Zone 1, I helped to create our newcomer office, actually. So now in APS, we have a newcomer office, and we also have newcomer pathway coordinators that help with our newcomer students, as well as we established a newcomer center at La Mesa Elementary School. And we're right in the middle of that work to be able to extend it to 6th through 12th grade, which I know is much needed. And I really want to keep talking, but I can't.
And 12th and final question. Why do you think you are a good fit for this job?
Because we're working on the newcomer program pathway for 6 through 12. I can finish that sentence. I hope that what comes across to you is my commitment to our students in Albuquerque. I know that my career has taken me to a place where I can be a superintendent in the United States, and I am committed to wanting to do that work in Albuquerque and not have to leave Albuquerque. I'm very committed to the students here, and I'm very committed to our community. And in knowing that, I think that it's really important to know that it's not easy to put yourself out here and to be vulnerable and to have people ask you questions and stare at you all day. And but it is a vulnerable place, but my care for the kids of Albuquerque outweighs my personal ego for putting myself out there. And I just want that to be seen with my commitment that I have to better the outcomes for students and to be in a place where I finally can help navigate the barriers that are in the district.
Thank you, Dr. Blakey. You now have 1 minute to give any final thoughts.
Oh, I should go back to number 8. I'm just kidding. I think that I kind of tied it up with the last question, and I just want to reiterate to you all that I am committed to following through on my word, and I'm committed to listening, and I'm committed to delivering results to make sure that we achieve the goals that our community has very publicly outlined for us, for the school board. And I know that it's our responsibility to make sure that we hold those true and that we work as a community to better our student outcomes and achieve the goals.
Thank you, Dr. Blakey. We will see you again this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our morning session with our candidates for the APS superintendent's position. We remind you that the Board of Education needs your help making this decision. If you could use the QR codes to submit your assessments, using the QR codes posted around the building or on the purple cards that are down at the table. Those go into a computer that the consultant then comprises for the board as they take into consideration the comments from the general public. We will also use the blue forms if you want to use the old-fashioned way and fill that out. That's also acceptable, and you can put that in the basket at the door as well. As a reminder, this evening, APS will host 2 more forums. One will be for employees beginning at 5 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock, we'll have a forum for the general public. We want to remind you also that there were about 500 people that submitted more than 1,000 questions, and those questions, while we can't get to them all for the superintendent candidates, those questions will be posted on the APS website. And both of those evening events will be held here at Bonifacio. So thank you for joining us.